Alrighty, what it is, everybody. Gavin is here behind the camera, and I wanted to talk to you guys about the AFC circuit, what it actually does, the adjustments, and then later on we'll get into my kind of guide to tuning to avoid issues and mental frustration. Okay, so looking at the pump, your throttle's attached to the governor spring and it's always pulling this way, and the governor is down here and it's always pushing the lever the other way. So it's kind of a balance, and that's what controls your fuel. Except for, and I'll let Gavin zoom in here, see this lever? So that lever position is determined by the fuel pin. And I'm going to slide it out. There you can see that lever moving. So pretty much your AFC is actually a fuel stop, and it is controlled by the boost. So as that fuel pin goes down, the lever moves out of the way and allows more fuel, and vice versa. If you don't have any boost, the pin comes up and that lever holds back the fuel. So this does not affect your air-fuel ratio by any means. It is simply just a throttle stop inside the pump. That is all it does. Now we'll get into some of the adjustments. So you have the star wheel here, and it usually has a spring on it. And by raising the star wheel, it requires more boost to acquire the added fuel. By lowering it, it requires less boost to acquire the added fuel. And the smoke screw, what it does is set your starting point. So you got this whole ramp to work with. If you back that smoke screw all the way out, you're going to be starting here, and that's minimum fuel. If you crank it down, you might start right here. So that's a little bit more fuel pre-boost. All right. So my guide to tuning, I'm going to kind of explain some common problems and the fixes for that, and why I do things the way I do them. So tuning one of these, obviously you have all your AFC adjustments, your idle screw, and your fuel screw. So the fuel screw pushes forward on the fulcrum lever, and you can see the angle of this lever change. And what this actually does is it changes the pivot point of this lever. And that's important because whenever you make a fuel screw adjustment, you have to reset every other adjustment to get back to where they were. So I always recommend setting your power screw first. Whenever you've had the top off, say you've done a governor spring, a fuel pin, whatever, do this first. And by do this first, what I'm saying is bury the star wheel and run the smoke screw at least flush with the nut. And that is because the AFC is no more than a fuel stop. So you don't want that holding you back when you're trying to find your idle and all this stuff. And reason being, say this was calibrated, you know, with a factory pin on the deep side, and all you did was put an aftermarket pin in it, and you're like, well, I don't want to blow a bunch of smoke, so I'm going to back this out. Well, now you're starting here on the fuel pin, whereas where it was calibrated before, you were starting here. Well, now the thing won't start. So that's why I always recommend just burying that and run that smoke screw flush and get your max power where you want it with your power screw first, and then you can go back and raise that star wheel and raise the smoke screw to kind of dial things in from there. A lot of issues, you know, doing governor spring swaps or fuel pins can be solved by following that order. That's just something I've learned over the years. You know, I'm guilty of it too. I changed the fuel pin once, the truck wouldn't start, and I was like, what is going on here? So yeah, that's kind of my order of operations there. Also, your AFC springs. So there's 3 common springs that are found in the pumps. The green and black one, it is honestly the same exact spring as the silver spring that everybody sells. So if you have the green and black one, you do not need to upgrade to the silver spring. They are the same. The other two are a lot lighter, which means that you will get full travel on your fuel pin at a lower boost level with these two than you will with these two. So that is a way you can kind of tune the AFC to slow fuel down if you've got it cranked up or big injectors or what have you. But yeah, if you have the green and black, just stick with it. It's a good spring. All right, so now I'm going to talk about throttle indexing. And I always recommend, no matter what you're doing, keep this line lined up with the second mark here. And I'm going to show and explain why. So we've got it lined up now. And if you look in here, I'm going to kind of give you a visual of the travel. So that's what we've got with the stock indexing. Now, say you throw a governor spring in here and it's a 38 or a 4200. Those are a little longer than the stock one or the 3200 is, so a lot of guys are tempted to re-index the throttle. That would be this way, because they ended up with a lot more idle screw. So you re-index the throttle to the third mark, still goes to idle, but what you'll find is you can't get full travel there because it is now hitting inside the pump. So you've just lost travel.
And what is this whenever you go full throttle?
That's the full throttle stop. Yeah, the high idle screw, whatever you want to call it. But the deal is you lose travel if you do that. If you go the other way, so there's the first notch. Okay, now we're hitting both stops, but if you look inside the pump, you've lost travel that way. So any alteration of the factory index, no matter what, you're losing travel inside the pump. And that's the reason I clipped the springs, and I'll show you now the difference in length. So here's a stock spring versus a 3800 that has not been clipped. You can see there's a big difference. So that's the reason I clip them, is to maintain the factory index and as much travel inside the pump as we can, because that gives you more tuning options, and it'll make it run better. You know, why limit yourself? So it's very important to maintain the factory index. All right, so a little bit more on fuel pins. Once again, this is simply just a fuel stop that is controlled by boost. So in my previous statements of burying the smoke screw and the star wheel, this is why. Your aftermarket pins start clear out here at the bore. Your stock one does not. So these actually defuel more, but also fuel more within the limitations of the pump. So that is why I recommend starting your tuning with the smoke screw buried, so you're not running into any issues with it holding fuel back when it shouldn't. Another thing I wanted to touch on is this washer here. This is something, whenever the pump was calibrated, they did this to limit travel for the max CCs. That being said, you can do this or use this, whether it's washers, whatever, to limit your max fueling. We actually did this with Gavin's truck. I think it was running like 720s or 17s, I don't know. But we stacked some washers on here to limit fueling, to slow it down enough to run 770, and it worked really well. And by doing it this way, you don't have to readjust your idle or anything. It just strictly limits your max fuel. So that's a pretty cool deal you can do with the AFC and your fuel pin.